told my simp husband he should do what I say. What he did next was terrible. Hello, Reddit. My name is Alicia, and I'm 30 years old. I've been married to my husband, Victor, for 7 years. I'm a stay-at-home wife, and while I'd love to say that my life is perfect, things have taken a turn for the worse recently, and I'm here to share my story in hopes of getting some advice. Let me start by saying that Victor is what you'd call a simp. He's the type of man who bends over backward to make his wife happy, never argues, never complains, and practically worships the ground I walk on. Honestly, at first, I thought I hit the jackpot marrying him. Who wouldn't want a man who's always there to pamper you, handle the bills, and make sure you never have to lift a finger? But over the years, I realized that Victor's devotion wasn't as attractive as I thought. He's too soft, too willing to let me have my way no matter the situation. He never stood up to me, not even once. I could say anything to him, anything at all, and he would just nod or say, "Whatever makes you happy, Alicia." At first, it felt empowering to have that kind of control over someone, but soon it started to irritate me. I wanted him to push back sometimes, to challenge me, to show he had a backbone. But Victor? No, Victor was too much of a pushover for that. I started to lose respect for him little by little. I know that sounds terrible, but I couldn't help it. A man who never puts his foot down, who agrees with everything his wife says, no matter how ridiculous. That's not attractive. I wanted excitement, passion, someone who could match my energy, and maybe even put me in my place once in a while. But Victor wasn't that man, and I began to see him as weak and spineless. I won't lie to you. I took advantage of his nature. Victor always let me make the decisions in our marriage, where we lived, how we spent our money, even what car he drove. It felt like I was in complete control, and I relished that power. I dictated everything, from how he dressed to what we ate for dinner. If I didn't like something, it didn't happen. If I wanted something, Victor would bend over backward to make sure I got it. For example, there was a time I decided I wanted to redecorate the house. Victor had just spent months saving for a new car because his old one was on its last legs. But when I brought up the idea of getting new furniture and repainting the entire house, he didn't hesitate. He emptied his savings account and used it for the renovations. When I asked him if he was okay with putting off getting his car for another year, do you know what he said? "It's fine, Alicia. I'll manage. I just want you to be happy." And that was it. No pushback, no argument, nothing. I know I shouldn't have done it, but I started testing the limits of what I could get away with. I'd demand things just to see if he'd say no, but he never did. Sometimes I'd yell at him for the smallest things, like forgetting to take out the trash or leaving his socks on the floor. He'd just lower his head and apologize, never once raising his voice at me. It made me feel like I was the only adult in the relationship. I even joked with my friends that I didn't have a husband. I had an overgrown child who couldn't say no to me. And the worst part, I convinced myself that I deserved more. I started to think that Victor was holding me back from the life I truly wanted. I told myself I deserved a man who wasn't afraid to take charge, someone who could match my energy, someone who made me feel alive. Victor was dependable, yes, but he was boring, predictable, too perfect. And the more I thought about it, the more I resented him for being exactly what I had once thought I wanted. Looking back now, I realize I was cruel to him. I belittled him constantly, called him names like spineless and pathetic during arguments, and used his love for me as a weapon to get whatever I wanted. If he ever tried to share an opinion, I'd shut him down, saying things like, "Oh, what do you know about this? Just let me handle it." And he'd let me, every time. I know what you're thinking. If I felt this way about him, why didn't I just leave? But that's the thing. Victor was a good provider. He made sure I didn't have to work. He took care of the kids, and he gave me the freedom to do whatever I wanted. Leaving him felt like too much of a hassle, so instead I stayed and convinced myself that as long as he kept doing what I wanted, I could tolerate him. I'm not proud of how I treated him, but at the time I didn't think there was anything wrong with it. I mean, wasn't it his fault for letting me walk all over him? He could have stood up for himself, could have said no, could have shown me he had some fight in him, but he didn't. And so I kept pushing and pushing, never realizing just how far I'd gone until it was too late. This is where my story starts, Reddit. I thought I had everything under control, but Victor's response to my latest outburst turned my entire world upside down. I don't even know how to process what happened next, and I need your help. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, Reddit. I've been cheating on my husband for the past 4 years, and not just one time or with one person. No, there have been multiple men, and I didn't feel even a shred of guilt while I was doing it. Looking back now, I know how awful that sounds, but at the time I justified it by telling myself that Victor was just too boring, too weak, too much of a pushover to be the man I needed. He was dependable, sure, but that's not the same as being exciting. And I wanted excitement. I craved it. It all started innocently enough, or at least that's what I told myself. Victor had invited me to one of his company dinners. He worked at a mid-level job in an accounting firm, and every year they'd throw this fancy banquet for their employees and their families. He was so excited for me to come with him, kept talking about how proud he was to have me as his wife. He even bought me a new dress for the occasion, because he wanted me to look like the most beautiful woman in the room. And I did. I knew I looked stunning that night, and apparently I wasn't the only one who noticed. During the dinner, I was introduced to one of Victor's coworkers, a younger guy named Ryan. He was charming, confident, and nothing like Victor. Where Victor was quiet and humble, Ryan was bold and flirtatious. The way he looked at me, like I was the most desirable woman he'd ever seen, lit a spark in me I hadn't felt in years. We exchanged numbers under the pretense of me wanting to ask him about some event planning tips for a charity I had casually mentioned, but we both knew what we were really doing. The fling with Ryan was electric. I felt alive again, sneaking around during the day while Victor was at work, meeting Ryan in hotels, or sometimes even in his car. I told myself it was harmless, that Victor didn't need to know because it wasn't like I loved Ryan. It was just physical. I convinced myself that I deserved this because Victor wasn't fulfilling my needs as a woman. He was too safe, too predictable. Ryan, on the other hand, made me feel wanted in a way I hadn't felt since before I got married. But Ryan was only the beginning. After a few months, the thrill started to wear off. He was exciting, sure, but even he couldn't keep my attention forever. When Victor got a promotion and started working longer hours, I found myself with even more free time and fewer excuses for why I wasn't happy. That's when I reconnected with Dylan, an old high school classmate who had recently moved back to town. Dylan was everything Victor wasn't: confident, adventurous, and yes, a bit of a bad boy. We started talking on social media, reminiscing about the past, and before I knew it, we were meeting up for coffee. One thing led to another, and soon I was sneaking out of the house on weekends to spend the day with Dylan. Victor, being the ever-trusting husband, never questioned my sudden interest in girls' trips or self-care weekends. He'd even pack snacks for me to take on the road and remind me to have fun and not worry about anything. It got easier to lie to Victor the more I did it. He never pried, never asked too many questions. I think deep down, he trusted me so completely that the idea of me betraying him didn't even cross his mind. I took full advantage of that trust, using it to cover my tracks. I told him I needed to pamper myself to stay sane, and he would hand me his credit card with a smile. Meanwhile, I was booking hotel rooms and buying gifts for Dylan, all on Victor's dime. But Dylan didn't last long either. After about a year, I got bored again. He was fun for a while, but like Ryan, he wasn't what I was looking for. That's when I met James, the contractor we hired to remodel our kitchen. James was older, rugged, and had this confident energy that drew me in immediately. He was the kind of man who didn't ask for permission or second-guess himself, the exact opposite of Victor. I started flirting with James while Victor was at work, finding excuses to check on the progress of the kitchen remodel. It didn't take long for James to catch on, and before I knew it, we were sneaking off during his lunch breaks. I'd make him sandwiches and then let him take me right there in the unfinished kitchen while Victor was none the wiser. It was dangerous, thrilling, and exactly what I thought I needed. By this point, I was juggling multiple affairs, all while maintaining the image of the perfect wife. Victor never questioned my spa days, my shopping trips, or the fact that I always seemed to be just a little too busy for him. If anything, he seemed happy to give me space, thinking he was being supportive. I even laughed about it sometimes, how naive he was, how easy it was to keep him in the dark. He was working so hard to make a better life for us, and there I was, spending his hard-earned money on hotel rooms, lingerie, and gifts for other men. Victor's devotion to me made it all too easy. He never once suspected a thing, not even when I started coming home late at night or disappearing for hours without explanation. He was too trusting, too willing to believe the best in me, and honestly, I thought I could keep it up forever. I thought I had everything under control, that I could live this double life indefinitely. But I was wrong. So wrong. What Victor did next completely blindsided me, and now I'm here, desperate for advice on how to fix the mess I've made. I never thought it would come to this, but here we are. It happened on a regular evening, one of those days that felt like they dragged on forever. Victor had just come home from work. As usual, he looked exhausted, yet he didn't sit down to rest. Instead, he immediately started cleaning up the mess in the kitchen. I was already irritated because the kids had been driving me up the wall all day, and my headache had made it impossible to finish cooking dinner on time. I noticed him wiping down the counters and stacking dishes in the sink, moving silently like he always did. That silence, though, annoyed me more than anything. Normally, he'd ask how my day went or try to make conversation, but that night, he didn't. He just focused on cleaning, like a dutiful little housekeeper. It grated on my nerves. I snapped at him for not asking if I needed help with dinner. I couldn't even stop myself. The words came out sharp and cutting, and I knew they would hurt him. He turned to face me, his expression confused, like he genuinely didn't understand why I was mad. It was always like this with Victor, him looking at me with that lost puppy expression, trying to make sense of what I wanted from him. It was infuriating. He asked me what I needed him to do, and it made me angrier. I didn't want to explain myself. I didn't want to manage him. I wanted him to know. I wanted him to be something he wasn't, stronger, more decisive, less pathetic. The anger bubbled over, and before I could think twice, I said what I'd been holding back for years. I called him a simp. I told him he should just do whatever I wanted and stop pretending to have a backbone. I let it all out, every ounce of frustration I'd built up about him being so spineless, so passive. After I said it, the room went silent. Even the kids, who had been noisily playing in the living room, seemed to sense the tension and quieted down. Victor didn't yell or argue. He didn't try to defend himself or reason with me like he usually would. He just stood there looking at me with this blank expression I couldn't figure out. For a moment I thought I'd finally broken him, that he'd crumble and apologize like he always did. But he didn't. Instead, he just nodded, like I'd said something reasonable and obvious. Then he went back to washing the dishes, without a word. I didn't know how to feel. Part of me felt victorious, like I'd finally put him in his place. I thought I'd won, that I'd stripped away whatever scraps of defiance he might have had left. But another part of me felt uneasy. There was something off about the way he reacted, or rather, didn't react. He didn't look hurt or defeated. He just looked calm. Too calm. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself it didn't matter. I'd always been in control of our marriage, and now it was finally clear to both of us who called the shots. I convinced myself that this was what I wanted, what I deserved. I thought the conversation was over, that he'd surrendered completely. But looking back now, I realized that wasn't surrender. That calm, quiet reaction wasn't what I thought it was. It wasn't defeat. It was the beginning of something I never saw coming. After that evening when I lashed out at Victor and called him a simp, things in our marriage started to shift in ways I didn't understand at first. At the time, I thought I had finally broken him, that he'd accepted his place in the relationship as the obedient husband who did whatever I wanted. And at first it seemed like that was exactly what had happened. But looking back, I realize now that his behavior wasn't submission. It was something entirely different, something much colder. Victor stopped being his usual self. He still did everything I asked him to, but there was no warmth in it anymore. He didn't ask questions, didn't try to make conversation, and didn't offer his opinion on anything. If I told him to do something, he did it, perfectly, precisely, and without hesitation. But it felt wrong, like he was a machine following orders instead of a person. For example, if I asked him to pick up groceries, He'd bring back exactly what was on the list and nothing else. No extra snacks for the kids, no flowers for me like he used to do, just the bare minimum of what I had asked for. When I asked him to clean the house, he'd scrub every surface until it sparkled, but there was no joy in it, no sense of him trying to please me. It was like he was going through the motions, and it left me feeling strangely unsettled. He stopped asking me how my day was. He stopped telling me about his. He only spoke when spoken to, and even then his answers were short and to the point. At first, I didn't care. If anything, I thought it was better this way. He wasn't whining or bothering me anymore. He wasn't getting in my way. But over time, it started to feel off, like he was emotionally checked out, like he wasn't really there anymore. Victor also started coming home later than usual. He said he was working overtime, and I didn't bother questioning him. If anything, I welcomed the extra time alone. His absence gave me more freedom to do what I wanted, and I used it to deepen my affairs. With him out of the house so often, I didn't even have to be discreet anymore. I started bringing one of my lovers to our home. I told myself it didn't matter because Victor was too oblivious to notice or too weak to confront me if he did. But then there was the night everything came crashing down. I had just gotten back from meeting another man. I wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. I walked in through the front door like I owned the place, fully expecting Victor to be asleep or out working late again. But when I stepped into the living room, he was sitting there, waiting for me. He wasn't angry or upset, at least not outwardly. His face was calm, his expression unreadable. There was something in his eyes, though, something intense, something I didn't recognize. It made me stop in my tracks. On the coffee table in front of him was a thick folder. I didn't know what it was at first, but the way he looked at it, then at me, made my stomach drop. He told me to sit down. His voice was steady, almost gentle, but there was an edge to it that sent chills down my spine. For once, I didn't argue. I sat down, and he pushed the folder toward me. I opened it, and the contents made my blood run cold. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, showing me with different men in different places. Some were taken outside hotels, others at restaurants, and a few, God help me, even in our own home. There were screenshots of text messages, printed copies of emails, and receipts from hotel bookings, all with my name on them. It was everything. Every affair I'd had over the past 4 years, documented in excruciating detail. I felt my heart pounding in my chest as I flipped through the pages, my hands shaking. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I looked up at Victor, but his expression didn't change. He just sat there, calm and collected, waiting for me to finish. When I finally looked back at him, he started speaking. He told me that he'd known about my affairs for years. At first, he said he'd tried to ignore it, convincing himself that he could fix things, that he could make me love him again. But after a while, he realized that wasn't going to happen, so instead, he started preparing. He hired a private investigator. He gathered evidence. He built a case. He told me he had already filed for divorce. He said he'd secured enough evidence to ensure full custody of our children, and he'd moved his savings into a private account I couldn't touch. He said he'd been patient, that he'd given me every chance to change, but now he was done. I couldn't speak. I couldn't think. I just sat there staring at him, trying to process what was happening. This wasn't the Victor I knew. The Victor I knew would have cried, begged, tried to fix things. But this Victor, he was cold, detached, and completely in control. When he finally stood up and walked out of the room, I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. I couldn't believe it. I never thought he'd have the strength to leave me, let alone destroy me like this. But he did. And now, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to fix this. All I know is that I've lost everything. And it's all my fault. I sat there completely frozen as Victor spoke. His voice was calm and steady, like he was reciting facts from a list. There was no anger, no emotion, just this cold, deliberate clarity that scared me more than if he'd yelled or thrown things. I couldn't even bring myself to interrupt him. Every word he said felt like another piece of my world crumbling to dust. He told me I had underestimated him. He said it plainly, like it was the simplest truth in the world. He talked about how I had taken advantage of his love and trust, how I had used his devotion as a weapon to manipulate and control him. He didn't sound bitter, but his words cut deeper than if he had been shouting. It was like he'd stripped away the mask he'd worn for years, and now I was seeing the real Victor, the one I had never bothered to understand. He explained that all those nights he'd come home late, claiming he was working overtime, weren't what they seemed. He had been meeting with a lawyer, preparing for this moment. He had spent months quietly gathering everything he needed to make sure he could leave me on his terms. And the worst part, I hadn't noticed. I had been so caught up in my own selfishness, so confident that he would never leave me, that I didn't see any of it coming. Victor told me he had already made arrangements to move out. By the next day, he said, he and the kids would be gone. He didn't say where they were going, and I was too stunned to ask. He said he had rented a place and had already enrolled the kids in a new school closer to his new home. It hit me like a ton of bricks. He wasn't just leaving me, he was taking them too. I tried to speak, but no words came out. My throat felt like it was closing up, and my mind was racing, trying to think of something, anything I could say to fix this. But there was nothing. What could I say? That I didn't mean it? That I was sorry? That I'd change? It all felt so hollow compared to what he just laid out in front of me. He stood up and looked at me one last time. His eyes were so calm, so steady. It wasn't the look of a man who was conflicted or unsure of his decision. It was the look of someone who had already moved on, who had made peace with what he was about to do. He said I would hear from his lawyer soon, and that he hoped I wouldn't make things more difficult than they needed to be. Then he walked out of the room, leaving me alone with that thick folder of evidence and the crushing weight of my own guilt. For the first time in my life, I felt powerless. Victor had always been the one who bent, who compromised, who gave in. I never thought he had it in him to actually leave. I never believed he could stand up to me, let alone do it in a way that left me feeling so small, so broken. When he didn't come back, I sat there in the dark, replaying everything he had said over and over in my mind. How had I not seen this coming? How had I let it get this far? I thought I had control over everything, over him, over our marriage. But now I realized I had control over nothing. He had been planning this for months, maybe even years, and I never even noticed. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, calm and unyielding, as he told me he was taking the kids and leaving. I thought about all the times I'd brushed him off, belittled him, taken advantage of his love. I thought about the countless affairs, the lies, the way I'd laughed behind his back, thinking he was too weak, too stupid to ever figure it out. I felt sick to my stomach. The life I had taken for granted, the man I thought I could control, was slipping through my fingers, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Now, I'm here, writing this, because I don't know what else to do. I don't know how to fix this. I don't even know if it can be fixed. I never thought Victor would actually leave me, and now that he has, I feel like I've lost everything. I don't care about the affairs anymore, or the money, or the control. All I want is to get my husband back and keep my family together. But I don't know if that's even possible anymore. Please, if anyone has any advice, tell me what to do. I don't want to lose him for good. I can't. Update. Hello, Reddit. It's me again. I wish I could say things have gotten better, but they haven't. In fact, they've gotten worse. Much worse. I don't even know where to start because everything feels like it's spiraling out of control, and I have no idea how to stop it. Victor has completely cut me off. When he said he was leaving, I thought I'd at least have a chance to talk to him, to explain, to try to work things out. But no, he moved out with the kids the very next day, just like he said he would. I didn't even get to say goodbye to them. By the time I woke up, their rooms were empty, and he was gone. All that was left were the divorce papers he'd already signed, sitting neatly on the kitchen table. At first I thought he'd cool off after a few days, that he'd realize how extreme this all was and give me a chance to explain myself. But that didn't happen. Instead, I got served with a restraining order. A restraining order. He's made it so I can't even contact him or the kids directly. If I want to see them, or even speak to them, I have to go through his lawyer. Do you know how humiliating that is? My own husband and children, and I'm not even allowed to talk to them. It feels like everyone has turned against me. When people found out what happened, when Victor told them about my affairs, suddenly I became the villain in everyone's eyes. My friends, my family, even the neighbors, they've all sided with him. They look at me like I'm some kind of monster. I can't even go to the grocery store without feeling the weight of their judgmental stares. Even my closest friends, the ones who used to gossip with me and laugh about my girls' nights, want nothing to do with me now. They've all blocked me or stopped returning my calls. One of them even had the audacity to tell me that I deserve everything I'm going through. Can you believe that? These were the same people who cheered me on when I talked about how boring Victor was, and now they're pretending to be saints, acting like they're better than me. I reached out to one of my former lovers, just someone to talk to, you know. I thought he might understand, or at least listen. But when I told him what was going on, he laughed. He actually laughed. He said something about how I got kicked to the curb and then blocked me. It was humiliating. It made me realize that none of those men cared about me at all. They just used me, and now that I need someone, they're all gone. I feel so alone. Even my family has turned their backs on me. My parents, who always stood by me no matter what, said they can't support me after what I did. My mom cried when she found out about the affairs, and my dad hasn't spoken to me since. They said they're ashamed of me, that I've ruined my marriage and my children's lives. My aunt, who used to check in on me every week, told me she can't even look at me right now. I don't know how to handle this kind of rejection from the people I thought would always be in my corner. And Victor, I don't even recognize him anymore. He's not the man I married. He's so cold, so detached. He's taken the kids and built this whole new life for them, and I'm not a part of it. I can't stop thinking about them, about my babies, about what they must be feeling, about what Victor is telling them. Are they angry at me? Do they miss me? Or has Victor convinced them I'm some horrible person who doesn't deserve to be in their lives? I know I made mistakes. I know I hurt him, hurt all of them. But does that mean I deserve to lose everything? Does that mean I deserve to be cut out of their lives completely? I don't know how to fix this. I don't even know where to start. Please, Reddit, if anyone has any advice, I'm begging you. How do I salvage this? How do I get my family back? I know I don't deserve forgiveness right away, but I can't lose them completely. I just can't. If there's even a small chance of fixing this, of regaining custody of my children, please tell me what to do. I feel like I'm drowning, and I don't know how to come up for air. Update. Hi, Reddit. It's me again, and I don't even know why I'm writing this. Maybe it's just to get everything off my chest because I don't have anyone else to talk to. Things have gone from bad to worse, and I feel like my life is falling apart more with each passing day. The divorce is finalized. It's over. Victor got everything. Everything. He was granted sole custody of the kids, and I barely even got visitation rights. The judge didn't even look at me with sympathy. Not after the mountain of evidence Victor presented. Pictures, texts, hotel receipts. It was all there, laid out for everyone to see. I couldn't argue, couldn't deny it. I just sat there in that cold courtroom, listening as the life I had built was stripped away from me piece by piece. Victor's lawyer made sure the custody arrangement left me with almost nothing. I can only see the kids twice a month, and even then, it has to be supervised. Supervised, like I'm some kind of criminal or unfit mother. It's humiliating. The worst part is, the kids barely look at me when I see them. They seem distant, like they don't even know who I am anymore. I don't know what Victor has told them, but it's obvious they're angry at me. And honestly, who can blame them? I've hurt them in ways I never meant to. On top of that, I've been ordered to pay child support. The amount is ridiculous, more than I can afford. Victor's lawyer made sure of that too. I'm working a minimum wage job now, something I never thought I'd have to do, just to scrape together enough money to send him every month. It's humiliating, going from being a stay-at-home wife who didn't have to worry about money to someone who barely has enough to pay rent in a tiny, rundown apartment. I can't even afford a car anymore. I take the bus to work, and every time I see a family riding together, I feel this sharp ache in my chest, thinking about everything I've lost. And Victor? Oh, Victor is thriving. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that he's been seeing someone new. Apparently, she's younger, prettier, and completely adores him. I've even seen pictures of them together, him smiling, looking happier than he ever did with me, and her clinging to his arm like he's the perfect man. And maybe he is. Maybe he always was, and I was too blind to see it. But seeing him move on so easily, while I'm stuck here in this mess, feels like a slap in the face. I can't stop thinking about all the years I wasted. All the times Victor tried to love me, tried to make me happy, and I just pushed him away. I used to laugh at how devoted he was, calling him weak, calling him a simp. Now I see it for what it really was, love, genuine, selfless love, and I destroyed it. I took it for granted, thinking it would always be there, thinking he'd never leave no matter what I did. But I was wrong. He left, and now he's happier without me. Part of me is filled with regret. I wish I could go back and undo everything, tell the younger version of myself to cherish what I had before it was too late. But another part of me feels bitter. Bitter that Victor could just walk away and build this perfect new life while I'm left to pick up the pieces. Bitter that society seems to celebrate men like Victor when they finally stand up for themselves, while women like me are left with nothing but judgment and shame. I keep hearing people say, well, she got what she deserved, and it makes my blood boil. Is it really so wrong to want more? To crave excitement? To make mistakes? Why does that mean I have to lose everything? Why does that make me the villain? Victor wasn't perfect either, but no one wants to talk about that. Everyone just wants to paint him as this saint who finally escaped the clutches of his evil wife. I can't help but blame society for this. It's like there's this narrative that good men like Victor should eventually turn into these vindictive exes who punish their wives for not being perfect. And that's exactly what he's done. He didn't just leave me, he destroyed me. He took the kids, the house, the money, and now he's rubbing his new relationship in my face. How is that fair? I know some of you will say I brought this on myself, and maybe you're right, but I didn't expect this. I didn't expect Victor, of all people, to do this to me. I thought he loved me unconditionally. I thought he'd always forgive me, always stay, no matter what. I guess I was wrong. So here I am, sitting in my tiny apartment, wondering what's next. I don't know if I'll ever be able to fix my relationship with my kids, or if they'll just grow up hating me. I don't know if I'll ever be happy again. All I know is that I've lost everything, and there's no one to blame but myself. If you're reading this and you have a good man in your life, don't make the same mistakes I did. Don't take him for granted. Don't push him away. Because once he's gone, you'll realize too late that you had everything you ever needed, and you threw it all away. Trust me, it's not worth it.